Wait, it is, y'all. Episode 8 is on the books. It's here. We got to talk about it. But first, if you guys did enjoy this content, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. Let's get into it because there is a lot to discuss about episode 8. So, essentially, we open up with Belle just getting the snot kicked out of him. And there's a lot to really unpack here. He hates him. Like, absolutely hates him. You even start to see sympathy from some of the other Familia members because they basically, he beats the tar out of him. And they literally just rush in, heal him, and then he's just back for more. It is a brutal, brutal onslaught. And the funny part about this, and it's one of the things that I think bears the most discussion here, is Belle did not officially level up prior to all this, which is kind of convenient because I think he would actually hold his own a little bit more had Hestia actually leveled him up before this. But nevertheless, Belle he's gonna be, he's gonna get a serious boost after this fight. Now, one thing I always forget, we immediately get into it because I'm so excited. I just watched the episode. And I always forget to get into the numbers because I think the numbers are really important this week. And funny enough, even though there wasn't a huge amount of action, the action we did see was really good this week. This is actually and the funny part is, dare I say, this is kind of what JC Staff is really good at. The portions of action that we see are really stellar. And then what they do is they focus on reactions to this, people's faces and all that. And they even will, like, sometimes they'll just be still frames, you're just slowly panning over them with like a little bit of motion in the background or something of that nature. It's ways, and we've talked about it before, but ways to cut corners to kind of get reaction shots and to get action shots, and then they can focus more on the actual animation quality. So I've actually sat here, and one of the things I do when I'm going over the animation quality is I like to pause this at different steps of the way and see the actual little in-between shots. And normally in an episode like this, at least lately in the season, is a lot of these tweens just look really bad or are genuinely just not there. Like, it'll jump from action to action and without, a whole lot of hesitation. Not a lot of in-between shots are animated. But here there's actually a lot of in-between shots that are really well animated, really well drawn. And I think part of that is because they were able to focus their efforts on other portions of the episode. This is what I want to see JC Staff do. Because more than anything else, I accept the fact this is an old school style of studio. They do things in a very old school way. Everything, like the TV broadcast is 24 frames a second, so they animate in about 12 frames. And most of the time it works. But when you get into heavy action sequences, we've had a lot of shows in the past, I'd even say 2, maybe 3 years that have really raised the bar on what we expect to see out of action sequences. And this is what I want to see. Take those efforts that you could be spending improving the action sequences and maybe like some of the narrative sections, or even like what they did here where they cut away to people's reactions, just facial expressions and things like that. Then you can focus on getting those action sequences right. So really, the animation here is fantastic. I'm going to give it a solid 9, maybe even 9.5. It ain't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they have clearly... I'll say this. This is like season 3 when Omori finally came in. You could tell that Omori was having more input on the episodes and things like that. Even in season 4, where Omori was very hands-on, this is the kind of quality we saw out of that, and this is what I want to see. It's not perfect, and it's not quite what I was talking about before, but it is a definite step up, in my opinion, from what we have seen in the past. But part of that, like I said, is because there's a lot of narration in this episode, and there's not as much action. So when there is action, it's on point. I do still think there's some things that they could do to draw the eye in a little bit more in certain, in the narrative portions of the episode. But, like I said, not being perfect, it's still really well done. When you get things like the water effects and the blood, frankly, there's tons of blood in this episode. It's all really on point. So maybe not a 9.5, maybe like a 9.25, but still like a solid 9 in my opinion. Good animation. I love the story aspect of it, but what I want to talk about first is some of the audio. Now, there was a weird audio choice. I'm going to give the audio a 7 on this episode. Because audio, I'm not going to say audio is easy. Audio is far from easy. There are so many minor nuances that you don't even realize unless you're in the production side of it that makes such a heavy difference in how things are perceived. But one thing that bothered me is a lot of the internal dialogue when Belle was in bed with Freya, it sounded strange. It didn't sound like normal internal monologue does in the series. It sounded like the voice cast was doing something different, or somehow the voice was modulated slightly different, and I did not like it. It felt very, very, very jarring. And yes, it's probably a lot of points to take off for one particular scene, but it was so apparent to me, even on the first watch when I'm just trying to absorb the episode and enjoy it, it took me out of the episode for a moment. So this is a weird situation where the sound design kind of fell off a little bit for me, and I don't know if it was a mic failure or it was an actual stylistic choice, but it wasn't good. Narrative 10, solid 10, and what I love is little things you forget about, like Belle's armor and the note that Hestia has from Hephaestus and things like that they're looking for, or that they come across, or just little nuanced things like this. Even the interaction with eyes, just little tiny things that are just easily overlooked that are throwing a monkey wrench in the entire plan here as far as Freya is concerned. So that attention to detail I really, really, really adore. Now, it's really neat to see how everything is kind of progressing, how everything's playing out, and a lot of the story elements from the character interactions and a lot of just the general interactions of those characters with Belle, as Hedon very clearly is not enjoying his presence, and they make it well known. Solid 10 though in the story. I absolutely love it. So let's not go too crazy here. Let's jump into the episode and talk about it a little bit, because this was a great episode. So we already talked about the opening scene where he's beating the snot out of Belle, and there's a lot of this back and forth with the Familia about Belle. In fact, you do find out that the lower ranks, which I said before, didn't seem to be under Freya's control. Now, once again, if you've read the novels, you know certain things, but I always go into these episodes, I like to at least pretend, for the most part, for this video, that I don't have a huge amount of knowledge about the light novel. I like to kind of cover the light novel in and of itself, even though we kind of haven't done that with the season. But it is something that I do want to kind of start doing and comparing, because there are some really interesting comparisons. But we find out in this episode for certain that the lower ranks of the Freya Familia they're not, how do I put this? They either have been released or at some point they do seem to have been charmed, so that they are not currently charmed. They are not currently affected by this. So as far as the overall feel of the Familia goes, there is a lot of conflicting opinions on how Belle should be treated and how all this should go down. And I love that they start to really divvy out the different powers and the different responsibilities. And even at one point, Hedon wants Otaro to go train Belle, and Otaro's like, he ain't ready for that. That would be too cruel. That would just be too much. And I love that. I love the fact that Otaro's like, nah. He ain't on that level yet. This is the best. Like, Otaro could hold back. It's a slight plot hole, though, if you think about it, because, he did kind of train Asterius. But he was also under, I guess the argument is he was under orders from Freya to train the Minotaurs, so, I guess there is an argument to be made there that because Freya told him to, he probably did take it easy. But nevertheless, he makes it very clear that holding back is not his forte. But we do start to see here a little bit that Belle is starting to break. He's starting to even question himself. And even, there's a point at which, about the center of the episode, where Freya gets him in bed. And she's like, I won't do anything. Just come lay with me. And even Belle starts, this is the part I was talking about with the audio sounded really weird. Belle even starts to question it himself. And she's feeling pretty good about it, but because his mind is breaking, his body is giving up too, so he just passes out. But really, what he does in the following day is probably one of the most important things in this episode, because he's literally going around town trying to find himself, trying to figure out why he feels the way he does about this. And one of his first stops is the tavern. And nobody there really knows what he's talking about. However, Mamma Mia kind of just starts to she literally says she admits that she's part of the fray of Familia, and sort of that she's, as she puts it, semi-retired, and kind of risks her own situation by being like, it could be mutiny, but let me give you a few pointers. And she can't out and out tell him what's up, but she definitely doesn't mince words about it. So it's really, really, really interesting to see how that's going to play out, because I can't imagine that's going to go over well when and if Freya gets word of that. But everybody else in the tavern seems to be completely oblivious. And you also do start to see things with Hestia and even Wealth, where he finds the armor and all that stuff. Like, the whole thing's starting to unravel. But Belle, with these words from Mamma Mia, he basically starts to... Also, I'm hating the fact that I more starting to see that that's actually a reference. But Belle is... Yes, it took me that long to figure that one out. I feel slow. But Belle is really starting to figure out, what's going on. And he confronts Eyes. Now, Tione and Tiona are there with Eyes. But they just kind of blow him off, right? They're like, Loki's told us to stay away from him. We don't got any business with him. And Eyes is like, no, I feel like we should be training. Like, I feel like I've knocked you down a few times. And in fact, we should be training right over there on top of the city wall. And it's really interesting to see that Eyes is even starting to break out of this. So, the reality of all this is really starting to crumble. And Belle is essentially, he goes back to his training with just all new vigor. And you actually see him land a hit on Hedon after all is said and done. It's really, really, really crazy. Belle is given all new drive, and this is another one of those situations where I say the animation is actually really, really well done there. But to kind of bottle cap the episode, we start to get more of Hermes' side of it. And there was always that note that Hestia had from Hermes, and he's just like, look, when the time is right, send me this note, right? And Hermes he's been contemplating everything, but he even mentions that, like, to him, like, every day is like Groundhog Day, right? Oh God, that's a reference probably no one's gonna get. There's 3 of you out there that are gonna know that reference. Endless Eight. I'm half of you probably don't even know that either. But nevertheless, he's like, every day is a loop, and I don't know what I'm doing here. And every time he starts to figure it out, he's back in the loop. So he's just like, he can't break the cycle. And at one point, he walks out in the street and he yells for Osvi. He realizes Osvi's not there. And then he realizes that's probably for a reason. And Osvi tells him, go to this cart. Go to the potato snack vendor, and it'll all make sense. You know, but she's cloaked. She's completely invisible at this point. She just kind of whispers it to him. And of course, he goes to the cart that Hestia is operating. And Hestia drops him the note. And he hasn't fully snapped out of it, but he kind of understands. And he's like, okay. And he says, we will turn Aurario into the hearth. We will make this essentially the beacon for Hestia's flame. And I mean, that's what he means. That is 100% what he means. And if you know anything about the term Vesta, that essentially is Hestia's, like, power, right? That's her flame. That's her everything. So the next episode, being called Vesta, essentially is more or less going to be like a homie beacon for Belle. And I think this is great. I love the fact that there were just little, like, breadcrumbs and Easter eggs strewn about, and it was just waiting for the cast to kind of pick up on all this. So episode was fantastic. Absolutely loved it. It was not the most action-packed episode, but it was probably one of the best episodes. That's probably my criticism of the audio of the season so far. And I think the next episode might actually have the ability to blow it out of the water, but we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. We'll definitely be back for episode 9 next week, though. I will be uploading that one much, much, much later because next week on Thursday is Thanksgiving for those of us in the United States. So I will be uploading my episode on Friday. So make sure you guys subscribe to stay up to date with that. And I'll be back with more coming up here really soon. Got Dankuro, the gacha game. So got a lot to still talk about.